Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Special Council meeting, continued on Monday, October 18th, 2021, now at 6:30 p.m. in the evening. And could I do a roll call, please, beginning with Ward 1?
Good evening. Councillor Hanmer present.
Councillor Bodley present.
Councillor Veith present.
Councillor Henry present.
Councillor Bonigo present.
And the mayor's here too. That's all of us. Proceeding on to item 10A. This is an informal public meeting to consider. Oh, yes, I should mention that Councillor Freeman would want to declare a conflict of interest on this one, and she will formally declare it when she attends the next meeting. That's just a note for anyone listening on YouTube, or I guess only on YouTube. This is an informal public meeting. Consider item A, Z2112 535 Quiet Place. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future time. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should contact the planner, Max Kerrigan, at 519-747-8003 or at max.kerrigan@waterloo.ca, and that is max.kerrigan@waterloo.ca. If you would like to speak at this meeting, please call the clerk's office at 519-747-8705. I'll now ask the planner, Max Kerrigan, to provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, city staff, and members of the public. My name, as you've just heard, is Max Kerrigan. I'm a development planner and urban designer for the city. Tonight, I'll be presenting an informal public meeting for 535 Quiet Place, zoning bylaw amendment Z2112. The application was submitted by Hickory Terraces Limited, represented here by planner Kristen Barrisdale of GSP Group, who will be providing a presentation following my general overview. Next slide, please. The subject is a triangular site on Quiet Place, which was formerly known as Old Albert Street, a cul-de-sac off of Albert Street. The site's flanked by Quiet Place to the south, a multi-use trail to the east, and the Ion-CN rail corridor to the west. Community context includes townhouses and walk-up apartments to the south and east, some treed open space lots to the north and the west, the Albert McCormick Community Center to the northwest, and higher density residential apartment buildings beyond. Next slide, please. The property is currently vacant, as shown in these pictures. You can see in the upper left corner, there's a pedestrian link across the Ion corridor to what is known as, I believe, as Old Beringer. In the top right, you can see there's a multi-use trail that extends from Albert to just beyond the Albert McCormick Community Center, and just another general shot showing the property as it currently sits vacant. Next slide, please. Generally, this is a conceptual aerial perspective of the development proposal. The proposal consists of 3 8-story residential towers sitting upon a shared 4-story podium, totaling 12 stories. The development will consist of a mix of 1- and 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please. Here are 2 additional perspectives of the proposal. They provide further reference of how the towers sit upon a podium that ties the towers together in a V shape that sits upon a parking deck that emerges from below grade as the site slopes downward from south to north. Next slide, please. This rendered site plan provides additional information and clarity on the balance of building versus parking deck, as well as the location of proposed amenity spaces around the perimeter of the site, as well as upon the parking deck in various locations. Next slide, please. With respect to policy framework, the subject site is designated mixed-use, high-density residential in the official plan, which contemplates multiple residential development. It's intended to provide opportunities for high levels of intensification. Maximum density permissions are 600 beds per hectare, and maximum height is 40 meters. A small portion on the north side of the site is designated open space. The open space component is identified as locally significant wetland and is regulated by the GRCA. The applicant has been working directly with the GRCA to implement infiltration and stormwater management measures to mitigate any adverse impacts associated with the proposed development. As presented, the proposal conforms to the official plan. Next slide, please. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the subject site is zoned residential mixed use 40, which permits apartment buildings, a maximum density of 600 bedrooms per hectare, and a maximum building height of 40 meters and 12 stories. In general, the proposed development complies with the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. That said, the applicant has requested to amend the city's bylaw to remove a holding prefix and permit the following site-specific regulations. The holding provision as it applies to the lot shall not be removed until it is demonstrated that specific criteria related to noise, emissions, and vibration are mitigated, and safety standards are met with respect to proximity to adjacent built form. The proposed site-specific regulations include a reduction in the building setback to the railway corridor from 15 meters to 1.5 meters to permit an exposed parking structure, which is proposed to emerge from below ground towards the rail corridor due to a sloped site. Important to note is that the residential components comply with the 15-meter setback. The second site-specific regulation request is to reduce the parking requirement from 1 space per unit to 0.9 spaces, a deficiency of 42 spaces. The third request is relief from the definition of landscaped open space to include landscaped open space and amenity areas upon the parking deck. The fourth request is to allow 1 parking space in the front yard setback near the main entry, intended for couriers, parcel delivery, food delivery, pickup, drop-off, etc. And the final request is to increase the permitted height of the parapet to meet Ministry of Labor specifications. Next slide, please. With respect to process and next steps, staff will complete a review of the submitted reports and plans. Then we will assess whether the requested site-specific zoning provisions constitute good planning, and staff will consider any feedback received from the public, commenting agencies, city staff, and of course any feedback received from council tonight. After which a staff report will be prepared with recommendations to council. We will then hold a formal public meeting, which has been scheduled for December 6th, at which point council will make a final decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide. Thank you for your time. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, Max. Does any councillor have any questions for staff? Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. First up, I see Councillor Veith. Please go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you, Max, for this. I have a few questions, but I think most of them I will ask probably the next delegation. But I'm going to ask you if it would be possible to have like a community meeting sometime between now and when this comes back to council, December 6th. I'm just thinking, it seems to me like it's tight, that if this does come back early in December, I think I just think there's going to need some time for folks in the neighborhood to get their heads around this and ask questions, and maybe there would be a way we could see, put up the boards. I'm thinking live, but anyway, just your comment or your if you think that would be possible.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. Certainly it's a very tight turnaround indeed. I think Kristen Barrisdale might be able to speak whether there's capacity to do that within this short time frame, but it certainly could be beneficial. At this stage, I've received 2 notes from the public, but that's not to say there won't be more as people start to digest some of the submission materials. Certainly something we can talk about. I'm not sure where and how that can take place, but it's certainly happy to speak about it further.
Okay, so maybe I'll just kind of gauge the neighborhood after tonight's meeting, because I know there's a lot of interest in this. So thanks for that answer. It's great.
Thank you, Councillor Reith. I do have a question, Max, just regarding the corridor, the rail corridor, which I think is CN operates on it, I think. Are there any restrictions there that impact this property that either you or the delegate can tell us about, or that we need to be cognizant about?
Through you, Mayor, to the Mayor, to yourself.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, absolutely. There are a number of factors that need to be considered and reviewed by folks who are familiar in those areas. That's why there's a holding provision in place to ensure that all matters related to safety and emissions are dealt with in a safe, resident and environmentally safe manner. So that is definitely being considered as part of the review, and their recommendations will then be given to us and in order to remove the holding.
Excellent. Thank you, Max. I do have a question now from Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Max. 2 things. I think it's 2 things. One, I was curious about if relief is being sought by the applicant on any landscaping provisions. I do see that on the website, but I don't recall seeing that in your presentation. And I mean, my interest there is generally landscaping is good, but I'd also highlight, as the neighborhood is well aware, including some of mine from the other side of Albert Street, the proponent did clear cut the site some time ago and distressed a number of people. So making sure we have sufficient landscaping and tree growth in the future, and how that complies with our policy is certainly on my list of interests in this proposal.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. Absolutely, we'll be looking at the provision of landscaped open spaces as well as amenity areas on site. They are requesting relief. Generally, from the location of the provisions of these amenity areas, given the slope of the site, it's my understanding that the parking garage will be extending out as the site slopes down. And so most of the landscape provisions will be provided upon the deck in various capacities, as well as along the perimeter on all 3 sides, including streetscaping and landscape provisions along the public path. I would imagine the delegate, Kristen Bairstale, will be able to speak to that further and provide additional detail.
Thank you, and I'm sure that Kristen will. When I was looking at the maps you were showing, the official plan map versus the zoning map, I note that in the official plan map, as you referenced, there's sort of a wetland space that we've sort of got a green color on in the OP, but the zoning map suggested the entire property, including that little finger, was zoned RMU 40, and that there was some work with the GRCA. Can you tell me a little bit more about that top corner and how all those pieces interact or don't interact?
Certainly, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Henry once again. It is my understanding generally that it's been an unassessed. It's an area that was deemed to have not been reviewed in great detail by the GRCA, so it's flagged, and through conversations through a concurrent site plan review process, the GRCA has been communicating with the applicant to ensure that any stormwater management and infiltration requirements for the adjacent aquifer stream it continues to operate as it does naturally. So they've been in communication, and once the water management is dealt with, which I understand is currently being discussed and worked through amongst the applicant and the GRCA, then they're happy on their end. And that's my understanding of at this stage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and we'll sort of get more as the review continues, just to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in the right places. And the last one I had, I'm intrigued by this increase the permitted height of the parapet to meet Ministry of Labor specifications. I know we've got a number of architectural regulations and zoning bylaw, but I'm curious that we might need to have a variance to one of them because of a ministry requirement, and that sort of piqued my interest. Can you tell me more about that?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you a whole lot about that because I was unfamiliar with it as well. Perhaps Kristen will be able to provide additional information. I think it has something to do with window washing, perhaps, and safety with respect to matters related to that. But I think she can provide additional details. But it may be something we'll have to identify if this is something that's cropping up more in the future.
Yeah, interesting, since, you know, if there's something in our zoning bylaw that is causing a problem on Ministry of Labor, that's obviously something I'd be very interested to. It looks like Joel's ready to weigh in on that.
Yeah,
Through
please
your
go
Mayor,
ahead, Joel.
through your Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Henry. In the zoning bylaw, we originally established regulations for parapets as architectural features. So there's a limited height that's permitted with respect to those parapet architectural elements for the building. In this case, the developer wants to use the parapets as well as for the architecture, but also to meet basically a railing requirement around the rooftop edge. So it doubles as a Ministry of Labor requirement and as an architectural feature, and hence the request for a slight increase to the requirement of the bylaw, which I think is 1.2 meters. They're seeking, I think, 1.8 meters to allow that architectural feature to also double effectively as a wall and satisfy Ministry of Labor requirements through the building permit process. So something we haven't come across to date, but it is an interesting issue that we'll have a look at and determine whether the bylaw in a broader sense should be reviewed with respect to this matter and updated at a future time.
Interesting. Thanks for the detail, Joel.
Thanks for the good question, Councillor Henry. I don't see any more hands up, Max. So I will now call upon a registered delegations to speak, and we do have one, and it's Kristen Bearsdale from GSP Group. Let's probably has a presentation. We'll bring that up and welcome in Kristen. There we go.
Good evening. How is everyone tonight?
Doing well.
Thank you. My name is Kristen Bearsdale from GSP Group. We were approached by both Premier Project Consultants as well as Hickory Terraces to assist with the zone change application that was submitted to the city for 353 Quiet Place. Next slide, please. I will try to keep my presentation very brief, as Mr. Kerrigan touched on a number of the considerations and proposed development considerations for the site. I'll provide a brief overview of the site in context, a summary of the proposed development, including some renderings and elevations so you can get an idea of perspective and views from some of the surrounding streets. A brief summary on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, hopefully touching or clarifying some of the questions that were brought up earlier. Just pointing out the supporting studies that were submitted in support of the application, and then answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So as Mr. Kerrigan touched on, the site that you see in orange is the property off of Quiet Place. You'll see to the right and the left of the site on your screen, Albert Street, as well as Parkside Drive. Those areas in yellow are areas that are currently serviced by existing Grand River Transit service. And then you'll see a dashed blue line down the center of the site, which is the LRT service. Just off of the screen or off of the image that you see is the Research and Technology Ion Station, which is within a walking distance to the subject property. As Mr. Kerrigan noted, the site is located within an existing residential community, and it is within walking distance and close proximity, whether you walk or whether you take a short transit ride to existing commercial uses at the corner of Albert, Behringer Road, Phillip Street. It's close in proximity to Albert McCormick, and then just a short ride away from further commercial uses located along Weber. Next slide, please. As Mr. Kerrigan touched on, this is just a schematic concept of the proposed development. It includes 3 12-story towers connected by a 5-story podium between all the towers. It includes a total of 423 residential units with a total of 735 bedrooms. As Mr. Kerrigan touched on, the majority of the building is comprised of 1 and 2 bedroom units. There are no 3-bedroom units being offered here. A total of 381 residential parking spaces and a total of 43 visitor parking spaces for an overall total of 424 parking spaces. There's also 254 bike parking spaces proposed on the site. The application or the proposed development concept that you see in front of you today has been reviewed a few times through the city's site plan review committee. It does have a site plan assigned number SP 20-11, and it's my understanding that through this detailed and extensive review, a number of the zoning deficiencies were highlighted, and the client was directed to submit the zone change application to rectify some of these. Next slide, please. The concept that you see, or the rendering that you see in front of you right here, is it's as if you were coming into the site from Quiet Place. So the road connection that you see on the left-hand side of the screen is Quiet Place. You can see the driveway connections into the building, one at the central location between 2 towers, and then one at the very end of the site. Along the right-hand side, this is where the pedestrian trail, or the existing pedestrian trail, is located. Next slide, please. Again, just another perspective, as if you were coming along the community trail, and from this perspective, you can also get a sense of the grade transition and change in slope that happens across the site, as Mr. Kerrigan touched on earlier. Next slide, please. So these are 2 different perspectives of what the proposed development will look like from some of the surrounding context. The top screen is a view from the community trail that exists along this edge of the site. And the bottom view is what you would see as you were pulling onto the site from Quiet Street. On the top slide, again, this gives a representation of some of the grade changes and challenges that affect the site. Over to the very right-hand side, you can see the gray parking structure as it kind of looks like it's piercing the ground. And again, on the bottom slide, the view from Quiet Place, again, you can see that parking structure as it comes towards the surface. This also gives you a general idea of the bottom slide of the grade change and perspective that happens along Quiet Street. Next slide, please. Again, this is a development. So if you're coming down the LRT corridor, this is the view that you would see from the train. If you look at the very bottom of the screen, you can see a dark black line, and that gives a clear indication of some of the grading challenges they face on the site, both as you move from east to west and then from north to south. And then the bottom slide is a view of the development as if you were at the top corner of the triangle, again, from the LRT corridor. Next slide, please. As Mr. Kerrigan touched on, the proposed zone change application speaks specifically to a few variances to the existing zoning that are reflective of the proposed development. As he spoke to, we are looking to remove the holding provision that essentially put a freeze on any development proximate to the LRT corridor and CN corridor, to ensure that both the region and CN Rail are in support of the proposed development, and that any future development at the site would not have any impacts on the rail line. A reduced side yard adjacent to LRT from 3 meters to agreed 1.5 meters is my understanding. This 1.5 meters has been discussed with CN Rail, and this is something that they are in agreement with. The specific zone change application asks to modify the definition of landscape open space to include some of the outdoor amenity space that's provided on the parking lot, the parking deck, excuse me. So the way that these bylaw is written right now is landscape open space is clearly defined in the bylaw and has specific indications as to what is not to be included in the calculation of landscape open space, including parking decks and parking structures. However, given the grade change on this site, there's an opportunity to provide for outdoor amenity space on some of the exposed parking structure to provide space for future residents that would include some landscaping components as well as hardscape surfaces. So the intent of this application is to slightly modify that definition of landscape open space to include some of those areas that would not typically be considered open space. The zone change application requests to reduce the residential parking rate from 1 space per unit to 0.9 spaces per unit. I should note that in addition to the 0.9 spaces per unit, there is a 0.1 space per unit being provided for visitor parking. The proposed application is requesting to permit parking within the front yard building lot line. And this is to permit a space for courier delivery or other delivery trucks to come in to have a short-term parking space to make deliveries to the residents. And finally, as Mr. Cotter touched on, there is an increase in the parapet height from 1.2 meters that's currently permitted by the bylaw to 1.3 or 835 meters. Next slide, please. So this is just an indication showing you the specifics of what's being requested and where they're being requested. The red bubbled area is the reduced setback along or adjacent to the LRT corridor. And as you can see, this is simply to reflect the parking spaces. There are no structures aside from the parking structure itself, but there are no habitable dwelling units that are proposed within this setback. The blue area you can see highlighted is noted as the additional amenity space. So these are the additional areas that are being incorporated and constructed as part of the parking structure that would not typically be included in the definition of outdoor amenity space. The black areas proposed show the increased parapet height of the buildings. Again, it's not a reflection of the overall building height, but rather the architectural features of the parapet. And finally, there's a drop-off / one delivery drop-off parking space located at the front of the building, which is hard to see at this scale, but it's a small space that is situated just off to the left of the driveway, the main driveway entrance that you come in from Quiet Street. Next slide, please. In support of the proposed development, a number of reports and studies were submitted to the city. A functional servicing report was submitted and indicated that adequate services can be provided on Quiet Place to service the proposed development. A noise and vibration study was completed and concluded that the proposed development was compatible from a noise and vibration perspective, and it did make recommendations for mitigation measures, including mechanical and facade upgrades, as well as noise warning clauses to be registered on title. A preliminary stormwater management report has been submitted and is currently being reviewed by the region and the GRCA, as Mr. Kerrigan touched on. It proposes on-site stormwater management techniques that would meet both the quantity and quality control measurement requirements of both the region and the GRCA. Finally, there was a planning justification report that was submitted, as well as an urban design brief. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I brought forward again just the conceptual rendering of the proposed development to assist with answering any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kristen, for your presentation. If anyone would like to speak at this meeting, please call the clerk's office now at 519-747-8705. I'll now go to Councillor Veith for some questions. Please go ahead. And I'll just check with Councillor Veith on your.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I was just trying to find my the mute button.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. Just a few questions. So I'm thinking about the environmental aspects of this. Have you guys considered any like solar thermal heating, for instance, or solar panels, that kind of thing?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I'm not aware of any of those considerations at this point. However, there's something I can circle back with the applicant to confirm as to whether or not those details have been explored at this point in the development process.
Okay, thank you. And I'm assuming that these are rentals. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I will have to confirm with them whether or not this will be a future condo application or whether or not it will be rentals. I'm not exactly sure of the ultimate tenure of the development.
Okay, thank you. Kind of back to the environmental thing. Do you know if they've considered EV chargers for the parking garage?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, it's my understanding, and I may have this wrong, but the building code actually now has a requirement with regards to electrical vehicle or the ability to convert to electrical vehicle parking spaces. And I would assume that they would be required to adhere to those requirements as part of future development.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing that is the whole parking, the number of parking spaces seems to me for a development in this location. Why do we need so many parking spaces? And I know there are less, and I just maybe that's something that could be considered, or that might just throw the whole thing off. But and related to that is, and you were very clear saying that there were no 3-bedroom units proposed, but I'm just wondering why. I mean, this neighborhood there's lots of families that live here, and housing it's a crunch right now. And I just would, I don't know how to put this as a question, but it would be, I was wondering why why they wouldn't consider having several 3-bedroom units, and maybe could have less parking. I don't know, but I just think that in a family neighborhood like this, I wonder whether why 3-bedroom units were not considered. Does that sound like an opinion? I'm hoping it's a question.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I'm happy to take this commentary back to the client. It's my understanding that a lot of this has probably been driven by market research. And I know, speaking from other projects that I have been involved with at a similar scale and size, that the market is dictating to developers that 1 and 2-bedroom units are kind of the ideal. They're the ones that are demanding the most attention, and they're the ones that are being picked up as very quickly or being required to as very quickly by future residents. But it's definitely something I'd be happy to take back to mention to them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you. I won't comment. And the other thing I want to just clarify is that drop-off delivery space, that's not on the street, that it's actually within the development, like off the street is what I'm getting at.
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski, it is on the private property and not within the municipal right-of-way.
Awesome, thank you. And then back to this is my last question, is back to the same question I asked staff about organizing a community meeting for the folks that live in the neighborhood, if somebody from your group or the developer would be amenable to speaking with the neighborhood.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I'm happy to take this back to the client. It's my understanding that that we're not in a bit of a time crunch at this point, but the need for this zone change application kind of came up very late in the site plan review process and through different iterations of the plan. And I think they're quite anxious to move forward with rectifying these variances. So if we can accommodate that within some of the timeframes that have already been discussed and agreed to by the city, I don't see that being a problem. But again, I will confirm with them after this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And I'll help with that. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Veith. Over to Councillor Hanmer. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Kristen, thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Veith has asked, I was ticking off most of my questions. There's one left, though, and that's I'm always interested in the impact on traffic in the neighborhood and the surrounding area. And has there been consideration given, or has a traffic study been done?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, it's my understanding that there has not been a traffic study submitted with the application, nor was it indicated as a requirement by both the region and the city. That being said, I'm sure that there's been attention been paid to site circulation. Quiet Place is a relatively quiet. A road is a matter of that, and most of the traffic is obviously being directed to that, which is then further redirected to the arterial collector of Albert Street. But perhaps I will defer to city staff on that question.
That's fair. Thank you. It's something I will be interested in when we get to the next stage. That's it from me, Mayor.
Thanks very much. Well, it's fresh in my mind, Max. Do you want to weigh in on that last question?
To you, Mayor, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Hanmer, was it?
Yes.
I am not familiar with the history on why that was not part of the requested submission materials. I will certainly circle back and provide that information after I consult other planning staff in the site plan review committee.
Thank you.
All good. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Next up, I have, and that was it, Councillor Hanmer?
Yes, that's it for me. Thank you.
Oh, okay, I will go over to Councillor Bonagor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. My colleagues have kind of been asking a lot of the questions that I was thinking as well. I do have a couple more though. You know, just going from the experience in Uptown, lots of residents in the towers have dogs, which brings some particular needs when it comes to developments. I was just wondering if the developer has considered how they might provide for the four-legged residents, such as whether there's potential to provide a small dog park on the location, and whether they're looking to provide some kind of dog poop collection service. I don't know if you can answer that, or if you can, that would be great.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I don't see any dog facilities provided on site. However, there are a number of outdoor amenity areas that would be appropriate for dog walking. And I also note that we are immediately next to a community trail, which also provides a great opportunity for residents to use for dog walking purposes. Perhaps some additional signage and indication to those using the trail with regards to cleaning up, providing facilities for waste, etc., could be explored as part of the site plan application.
And if you are perhaps talking to the developer, if you could just take back to them the fact that this is a quite acute issue in other parts of the city with towers, and there's been a lot of warm receptions when developers have provided kind of dog poop collection stations. That has always been a popular move, if I could just plant that idea. And the other thing I'm curious about is the provision of bicycle parking. You know, it's a great location. It looks like there's a lot of capacity for living a car-free or car-light life, thanks to the transit and the trails. But from what I could see in the documents, it looked like there was maybe like 250 spaces for bicycles, which seems, I'm just curious about that number, given that you're looking at 700 plus beds. So there's a lot of people and 200 or so bike parking spaces. So I'm just wondering, is there potential, is that something you plan to explore? Is this just a starting number? If you give some context there, that would be great.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, it's the bike provisions that are noted as part of the development adhere to the current standards that the city has with regards to both secure and public availability parking spaces. So we are not looking at this point to reduce the municipal requirement. Again, we're meeting the minimum requirement at this point.
Okay, I mean, I take that answer, and minimum's fine, you know, but it's a minimum. And I just, Mayor, that's all my questions. I just wanted to kind of just point out that Councillor Veith did raise a really good point in terms of those larger units. Just to reflect on the Ward 7 experience, again, we've got a lot of towers, and there's always a lot of curiosity and a lot of community discussion about the need for larger units. So I would expect it to be a very similar community need out in that part of the city, given just the great part of the city that it is. So I just wanted to kind of underscore Councillor Veith's comments there. But that's it from me. Thank you.
If I may add, it was confirmed to me while we were on the call that these will in fact be rental dwelling units.
Thank you very much. Late breaking news, Kristen. That's good to know. No, that is good to know. Next up, I see Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Hi, Kristen. Most of these have been covered through this. The last one standing on my list is on the landscape question. I get the conversation around amenity areas and looking for different things and grade changes, and certainly staff will look at that and bring back some thoughts when this returns. What I'm curious about for those either who live here or who live around here and are using the active transportation infrastructure surrounding this site, what their experience will be as they either walk up or bike up Quiet Place or up the trail. What are they going to sort of see or experience from the landscaping at the edges of the site? How that will be sort of greened and softened, given again what was on this site before your client clear cut it ahead of this proposal was a large sort of stand of trees that the community had come to enjoy.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, and it's noted on this development concept, you can see a significant amount of green around that corner of the site where there's a community trail as well as Quiet Place. The proposed development will adhere to or exceed the city's standards with regards to tree plantings along the streetscape. They will do their best to provide for landscape design that integrates the slope along that community trail edge of the site, as well as providing an architecturally and visually pleasing streetscape or facade of that building along that community trail. It's my understanding that some of the concerns have been raised by residents with regard to the tree cutting, and so we had a quick discussion with Mr. Kerrigan about that today, as well as the property owners, and I was provided documentation between the property owner and the city as well as the region, seeking permission to do some removal of the trees in the area a number of years ago to clean it up, if you will. And the tree removal that's happened, it's my understanding of late or of recently, is consistent with the previous approvals that were provided by both the region and the city, or sorry, the region, which was indicated by the region to be acceptable on private property.
Yes, I'll ask a more targeted question, and I will acknowledge and state that I am aware, and I know the ward councillor Veith is aware, because we needed to become aware that certainly it was not against regulations that the site was clear cut a number of years ago and has been attempted to maintain to that. I simply state that that was a fact of what happened. Whether it was certainly not inconsistent with regional rules. On the community trail part, I think what piqued my interest in particular from a landscaping perspective is some of the visuals you showed of what looked like tiers of sort of a tiered retaining wall style of multiple levels. That's what I recall seeing showing up there. And that makes it, I would think, more difficult to have sort of significant height from tree growth given that kind of terracing. So I am curious about what whether you're talking about sort of low-lying shrubs that we'll sort of expect to see there, or whether we're going to be able to have some space along that edge for tree growth over time that will provide some meaningful canopy for at the edge for both residents looking through their windows, and of course trail users, many of whom will be these new residents.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, there are some larger scale or larger sized trees that are proposed to be planted, I guess at the northern corner of the site, as well as some streetscaping planting that will happen at the edge of the community trail where it meets Quiet Place. But for the most part, there's quite an extensive system of shrubs and perennials and low-lying or small-scale vegetation proposed along the retaining wall that will to green up the look of that facade. However, restricted or limited in the size and type of species that you can plant along there, because yes, it is part of the structure and there is an element of it that's functional and paramount to the ultimate development of the larger structure itself.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. And the only thing I would want to mention, following up on what councillors have been highlighting, is the extensive trail system, and hopefully the developer is aware of the new trail that the City of Waterloo will be putting in that will go up to the market along, well, going up to Parkside Drive and eventually joining the new Region of Waterloo Market Trail, and just that connectivity down into Uptown Waterloo. It'll be a very, very bikeable community, and perhaps maybe as has been stated by others, perhaps more than the minimum biking is parking is would be advantageous for everyone there. But I'll leave that as food for thought. I don't see any further questions, so thank you very much, Kristen.
Thank you very much.
And I will now, I don't have any further registered delegations. I will now just take a moment to check with the clerk's office to see if anybody has been phoning in to be a delegate at this meeting. The clerk's office informs me there have been no calls on this topic at this time. People might be interested at a later point in time. There are no further speakers. This informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you very much, Max, for your report and handling this file for us.
Thank you, Mayor.
Moving on, skip down to say item 15, questions. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Any council have any questions for staff? Hearing none, we will go under a new business, and as you'll see listed there, we received communication from the City of Sarnia, a resolution of theirs regarding renovictions, and Councillor Veith had asked us or the clerk's office to place this on the agenda for new business. So I will turn it over to Councillor Veith to speak to this.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski and staff. This came up because this is happening in my neighborhood, and I happen to be reading through the resolutions that have been coming out from other communities within Ontario about this terrible thing that developers are doing. They're buying up properties and kind of forcing people, vulnerable folks, to move, and they're renovating and then upping the rents so that they're unaffordable for those folks. So the original resolution came from the City of Sarnia, and then I saw that the municipality of Chatham-Kent had also included it. So that's it's timely. So I believe that our council should be behind this. I have met with MPP Catherine Fife to talk about this, and she is going to bat for us. And she says to me that these things are worth sending, and that that she's on top of it. So I don't know what the next step is, whether we as a council endorse this one or we make that doesn't seem like we should make a new one.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, you simply need to move a motion to endorse the City of Sarnia resolution, which we've received as correspondence, and Just simply move
Okay.
that, and we'll see
All
if we
right.
have a final seconder.
All right. So I would like to I propose that our council endorse this resolution from the city of Sarnia, and I would like to have someone second that.
Well, I have good news for you. There is a seconder, and several want to comment on it. I will turn it over to Councillor Henry to second it, and then we'll start the round of comments, beginning with Councillor Henry.
Thank you.
Councillor Veith, I'm happy to second your motion. I think there'll be some questions showing up, but I'll start my comment process. Now it is timely, and I think what is necessary is to have a provincial regulatory structure and an incentive structure so that two things can be true. One, that longstanding tenants in rental properties can continue to be tenants and afford to be tenants. That's what rent control is generally designed to do, and allow people to have some stability in the home. I saw something written a while ago that gave me some thought, and that's that when you are a homeowner, what you're really trying to buy into is a form of rent control, is trying to control your payments for as long as you possibly can at a level that you find to be manageable, and that's what you're entering into when you get into homeownership. And renters deserve that same kind of stability, and for it not to be disrupted unnecessarily from changes of ownership. So on the one hand, we need to have that people who rent deserve the same kind of stability that as homeowners we have bought ourselves into, and not to be upended this way. It is highly disruptive. And at the same time, we need a system where landlords are able to and choose to, in part because they are required to, maintain the standards of their property, in that kind of a system. So if they are in need of updates and renovation, which to take transformative climate action on energy, there will need to be renovations and updates to old stock apartment buildings and old stock townhouse units. So we need a system that both protects the tenants and allows, incents, supports, and requires really landlords to make those kinds of upgrades in a way that benefits tenants and their quality of life, and manages and allows landlords to be able to afford to do that. That's the balance that we need to achieve in the system. And the system that we have at the provincial level right now does not do this. When the spread on market rate units and current occupied units is as wide as it is in this housing crisis, the incentive is exactly the opposite direction of where it needs to be. So this is a key step in doing this, ending rent evictions and having a regulatory regime that works and balances those interests much better. And also that we do what this council and other councils with the support of the region and other levels of government continue to do, and that's work on building, allowing more housing to be built and making sure that we have inclusionary zoning provisions coming in, and that we have other deeper affordability measures in place to be able to create affordable housing. We need enough housing to be able to staunch that gap between market rates and current rates for tenants to eliminate the incentive for landlords, and we need a regulatory regime that protects tenants so that they can have long-term stability in their homes, no matter who happens to own them at the time. So thank you for bringing this forward, Angela, and making sure that we can add our voice as a council to this very important issue, not just here in Waterloo and in the region, but province-wide.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. I have a comment from Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Henry has said it much more eloquently than I will, but I too am appreciative of this issue coming forward and our willingness to consider standing behind it. I would like to see there being that balance that Councillor Henry spoke about between the incentives for the landowners or building owners to make sure that their buildings, their homes are safe and continue to be affordable, and at the same time there's protection for those that are renting to have safe, affordable housing both during the renovation and afterwards. So I won't comment any further. Councillor Henry said a lot of what I was planning on saying, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. Over to you, Councillor Bodley. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. I'm not sure if we have the appropriate people necessarily on this call, so maybe this is a question for just broad consideration of staff going forward, but if somebody would like to comment, that would be great. My question is really, when we look at a lot of these types of motions, I like to ask the question, well, what are we doing about it? And so knowing that we have our affordable housing strategy coming forward, and one of the main sort of topics of conversation that has emerged through some of the town halls that we've hosted and panel discussions, et cetera, is about not only building more housing, not only building more affordable housing, but also protecting the affordable housing that stock that currently exists. I believe the motion that Councillor Veith has put forward here really speaks a lot to how do we protect the affordable housing that exists in our community today. So I'm wondering if we have any comment from anybody who is working on that affordable housing strategy as to whether or not we're starting to see sort of the renovation discussion emerging as something that we're looking at as part of our affordable housing strategy going forward, notwithstanding any provincial regulations that I think are sorely needed, as Councillor Veith and Henry have noted already.
Very good question. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Cotter, who has joined us tonight for the other part of the meeting. Please go ahead, Joel.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, through you to Councillor Bodley. The issue of this rent eviction process has been brought to light by the planning staff and is part of our review as part of the affordable housing strategy. We've been doing some investigation into what the rules are around. Most of the legislative pieces are above the municipal level, if you will, at the provincial level. But we are looking into this and looking at options to, as Councillor Henry indicated, strengthen and protect some of the housing affordability pieces that we do have, including things like looking at demolition control, conversion of properties from rental to condominium, and other strategies under the affordable housing work that Michelle Lee is our lead on. So there's awareness of this issue. We're looking at how it may fit into our strategy and options that we can maybe bring forward that can try and address, to the extent municipalities are able to address some of these issues, to try and deal with it to some degree.
That's awesome. Really happy to hear that, and looking forward, as I'm sure the rest of council is, to seeing what that strategy looks like and how it tackles all of the sort of intricate details that are needed to tackle the housing crisis. So thank you very much for that. Back to you, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions or comments. I think it's been well said. Let's begin the vote. I'll go back to, let's do Councillor Veith, and we'll just go forward from there.
I vote in favor. Councillor Veith, sorry.
Councillor Henry in favor?
Councillor Bonnegar in favor.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
And I'm not sure I heard you, Councillor Henry, at least on my end.
Councillor Henry in favor?
Thank you very much. And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Councillor Veith, for listing this under new business. I will now check with councillors to see if there's any other new business. Seeing none, I do see that we have to enact a bylaw for the special proceedings of council. Let's go to Ward 1, Ward 2 to consider this.
I believe, through you, Mayor, I believe we have two bylaws to consider, so I am happy to move the consideration of the two bylaws and vote in favor.
Thank you.
Councillor Bodley, excuse me, I will second the bylaws and vote in favor as well.
Councillor Veith, I vote in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor?
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Thank you, and the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. I was not looking at the screen, I was working off the old paperwork, so thank you for that. And with that, nothing further to do, so let's consider a motion to adjourn with Ward 1, Ward 2, please.
Councillor Hanmer, happy to move we adjourn our special meeting of council, and I'll vote in favor.
Councillor Body will second the adjournment and vote in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor of adjournment.
Councillor Henry, in favor?
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. Thank you very much. Thank you to all staff participating tonight and all the YouTube viewers out there. Have a good night.